Welcome to the Startup Sidekick Podcast.
Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Dobson, and I'm super excited to be here today. We have a great guest for you all. She really can do it all. She's been at the ground floor of a startup, employee number 3, as well as managing product, customer success, sales teams all at the same time. So you are going to learn so much. There's going to be lots of golden nuggets, and I can't wait for you to hear her story. She is currently the SVP of Product Sales and Business Development at Autovitals. So everybody, please welcome Jennifer Thronson.
Hi,
Jennifer. How are you doing today?
I am good.
Wonderful. I'm excited. I'm excited to hear about your story. I know people will once they start listening as well. But let's dive in. Before we get into the business side, let's just dive in. Tell me a couple things, 2 or 3 things about you that most people might not know.
Sure. It's probably the most uncomfortable I'll be today. I played and coached soccer for pretty much my whole life. So still casually play every now and then, but did play in college and then coached high school for a long time. So that was a huge part of my life for a long time. Let's see. I have not seen a ton of movies. So it's kind of a running joke with friends, coworkers. It's like something that comes up all the time. I haven't seen a lot of movies. I quote some sometimes and people are like, do you know what you're quoting? And I don't. That's a pretty funny running joke. And I think maybe third thing, I am oddly good at darts. So like at a bar.
Oh, darts. So you sneak up on people and challenge them to some dart games, huh?
Yes. I think I get underestimated, so that probably factors into it. But yes, I enjoy a great game of darts and skee ball. But yeah. I'm definitely underestimated more at the darts situation. So.
That's awesome. That's good to know. I will always have you on my team if we ever go out together. So let's talk about, in the startup world, you've kind of been around, worked at different companies, but like what originally got you into sales and maybe got you excited about that?
Sure. I don't know how excited I was, to be honest. I had been bartending and finished college, was bartending, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had a couple friends that had started working at Yelp here in Scottsdale. Were kind of telling me about their job and, parts of it seemed great. And then parts where, I get yelled at about reviews and I was like, that seems challenging and also fun. And I thought, there were things that translated from really bartending, but I was also doing schedules and managing liquor orders and things like that. So I seemed a little bit interested in it, went to the interview, really enjoyed it, got hired on the spot and just decided let's go for it. So I started as an AE at Yelp quite a long time ago, learned a ton. I think it was very challenging, but I enjoyed that part of it and made a bunch of friends and just kind of learned the basics of sales. And some of the consumer psychology and things like that. So it definitely interested me. It interested, me quite a bit, but I didn't necessarily plan for that. And it wasn't something, I wasn't I really want to get into sales. I just felt like I didn't really know what I wanted to do. That seemed like a good intro job to get some experience under my belt and then kind of figure it out is what I was thinking at the time. I don't know that I planned on liking it as much as I did, frankly. So
did you realize right away that you liked it or is it kind of grow on you as you were there?
Definitely grew on me. It took, and they'll tell you this, when you get there and as, it is at any job, it takes a little bit to click. We did get, yelled at quite a bit. So that was definitely challenging, but I enjoyed learning Salesforce and figuring out how a sales process works. And then Yelp does a really great job teaching just the basics of sales, assumptive language, asking for the close, those types of things that I thought kind of came a little bit naturally to me. I wasn't super comfortable making cold calls per se. That was still very awkward to me. And I felt very nervous, like everybody does at first.
Yeah.
Or everyone does.
Yeah.
But after it kind of started to click, I was like, oh, I like this. And it was super challenging, which I enjoyed. And especially there, I think it's a sales job where you can kind of, like the mechanics are all there and kind of provided to you. So I was very about like hitting the metrics, doing all the steps, and like seeing the process work was really interesting to me. And I felt like I can figure this out. Like I can do this if I can stop, being so awkward on the phone. So
As everybody feels when they first start cold calling.
well, and you're like right on top of each other, and it's so uncomfortable when you haven't done it before. And I feel like I'm an extrovert, but like I'm kind of shy until I'm not, if that makes sense. So I was not comfortable just being totally awkward in front of all these people. It was, I was the person like kind of whispering on the phone, or, I'd call and like hang up. So definitely had to overcome a lot of that stuff, but I felt like it was going to be helpful long-term. So I just kind of powered through, and the management was great, and the people I was working with were great. So it quickly became like who's going to be the best on the, our training team. And that part, I think I probably enjoyed maybe too much.
That's the soccer side, the competitive side coming out.
Yeah, I think so.
So let's talk about, so then your next adventure, kind of, you went to Kapow, and I think we're around number 30 or so. So a startup, definitely small, but not necessarily the ground floor yet. Like, what did you first learn there? What was the difference between a bigger company like Yelp and then moving to as employee number 30?
Great question. The biggest difference was certainly like the lack of process or really anything that had been built out. Like they didn't have sales decks. They didn't have any type of like scripting or anything like that. At Yelp, it was, they say this, you say this, they say this, you say this. And we had none of that. It was kind of like, go figure it out. And that was an event tech company, which I had like some experience in venues. Obviously, I'd worked in a lot of restaurants. I knew a lot of sporting teams and things like that. So I felt comfortable with who I was selling to. But historically, the company had hired mostly people with specifically like event planning experience, and I did not have that. So, talking with just other people that were in the role or in the other surrounding roles, felt like it didn't really translate. And I was able to quickly identify like some of the things we learned at Yelp would absolutely work here. And like, why aren't we doing some of that stuff? But yeah, I'd say the biggest change was just like lack of process and materials and even like metrics. So I had to be really comfortable with that quickly. And it was definitely very different than Yelp, where they've got, a whole training department. And here they were like, hopefully you figure it out. So
yeah. How long do you think did it take you to kind of transition and realize like, okay, I need to start putting stuff together. I'm just going to take the reins on this because there's no one else doing it?
Like day one.
Good. That's awesome.
Yeah. I felt like I knew some people there in different offices. So that was a dual-sided marketplace, and we had different ended up like 25 or so offices around the country. Phoenix was the third. And so there were other people in the roles in other cities. And then there were other kind of departments or like people doing different things also in Phoenix. So I felt like I was kind of warned. Like there's not a whole lot built out here. We haven't figured it out yet. We're going to try, not hiring someone from events and hiring someone with some sales background that also knows venues. And they didn't formally say like, can you please figure out something that will work? But that's kind of the challenge I put on myself. So I kind of knew that going in, and I did, prepare quite a bit and like reached out to people, had put together probably that first like week. I was like, what do you mean we don't call anyone?
Yeah.
What do you mean we don't try to find the owners online before we walk into their venue? So there were just things that I thought were really basic that hadn't been done. So I just started documenting all of that and kind of employed it myself. It worked great. So kind of went from there, but yeah, really quickly, I think it was a little bit the structure of the company as well.
Yeah.
So the people in my role on my side of the marketplace reported to people in Chicago. So I didn't have like a boss that was there every day, like training me and walking me through how to do it. It was very much like, here's your goal. You figure out how you make it happen. So I kind of went in with that mentality, which I think helped.
And you think that's for people looking to possibly join a startup? Do you think that's a skill that they have to have, knowing that there might not be a lot of structure and they need to be able to take it and run with it?
I would say, having worked at some really early stage that we'll get to and some a little bit later stage, it is definitely the key difference. And I think it's very hard. It's probably way harder to go from big company to small than the reverse, but it's very different. You have to be really okay with creating your own stuff, not a lot of structure, not a lot of direction, and to be actually successful, figuring out what you have to do and just making it happen and not being afraid to do that. I think that's the number one thing that holds people back or makes them not successful in a job where they might on the surface feel that they'll do well, because that can be very stressful and not everyone is, okay with that. And not everyone is maybe as process oriented and figuring out like, oh, I'm going to have to put this in place and figure out what works and what doesn't, instead of, somebody giving me direction. Those are two very, I think, different mentalities.
Yeah. And you'll learn quick which one you fit into when you join that world. And I know, like, from my experience, because I was at an agency before I worked in the startup world, but it's similar but very different. And I think you just you don't know what you don't know. And I think that's like the biggest thing is it's okay if you don't fit in the startup world. Like, you don't have to like mold yourself to make this fit. Like, you just have to innately be like that.
Yeah. I think that's
crazy.
true. Yeah. And it happens at kind of every stage too, I think, a little bit. Everyone's kind of find their sweet spot.
Yeah.
I think it varies probably depending on the role. I think some might translate a little bit better than others, but sales specifically at very early stage is very different than, the Yelps of the world where they've got every single thing built out for you, every single answer. There's not a ton of negotiations happening. It's like, these are the discounts that you can offer, period. So there's like not a whole lot of extra, I guess, process building or critical thinking that has to happen. Not that you can't find that. Obviously, different companies are different, but I think it's definitely different just being super early and having to figure out how to make it work for you and your style and given the stage of the company and the buyer. So
absolutely. And let's dive into that a little bit. So then you made a decision to go join like a pre-revenue, just barely getting their first customer type of company. Like, how did you rationalize that risk versus reward?
I don't know if I did. I liked the idea of getting, so I had just kind of taken this, thinking that I had from Yelp, and then I started using that at Kapow, and that worked very, very well. And so when that opportunity was presented to me, I was like, yeah, I think that this is a repeatable type of thing. I think like the general outlook in this process makes sense in different industries and selling software versus, ads and things like that. So I kind of wanted to prove it to myself. And then I wanted to prove to myself, because now I'd, worked with all these great people and met all these, other people at different companies. I wanted to prove that I could put a sales process in place and then also hire some really good people and train them and make it like an actual scalable thing. Because I was like, it worked for me. And then it started working for others at Kapow. But will this work like in other industries, in other, verticals and things like that? So I think I just saw it as a challenge, and it was more of like a why not. I also am a little bit impulsive. I think that probably played a bit of a factor, which I'm sure we'll talk about early stage startups. I do think that is something that has served me well, and then bad at other times. But I will make a decision quickly, and I will be okay with like a good decision instead of spending a ton of time trying to make sure it's perfect. I don't know if I've always been that way, but I think that's how I viewed that job at that time, and is really how I acted when we were there. So we made a lot of swift decisions. If we're going to be wrong, I wanted to be wrong quickly, revise it, and move on. So it was kind of like, this will be a fun test for me. Kind of what I was thinking at the time.
Yeah, but I think you're definitely onto something, because I've heard that more than once, is especially at the early stage, you have to make decisions quickly, and you have to be able to fail quickly to know if it worked or not. You don't have 6 months to, let's test out this campaign, let's test out this new process. You got to make decisions quick enough, but understand that there's going to be good and bad that comes with that.
For sure.
So let's dive into building that team just a little bit, because I think people would be curious to hear, you had to create that sales team, you had to figure out what it looked like and all the processes. Like, what were the type of people you looked for to fill those roles?
People I'd worked with is what I did
Yeah.
first.
Okay.
Also, people say it all the time and it continues to be true, but hiring just one person is usually not a great strategy. Then you have nothing to compare it to. Of course, I was selling at that time, but I was also, doing a lot of other things and putting processes in place. So I wanted to make sure that when I hired at least two people. I could compare them against one another. That particular company was a field service management software. And so I knew that I would need people. So we're selling to, some blue collar and some not very tech savvy buyers, which takes a bit of grit and resilience, as any sales job does. And in particularly in this industry, something more like the challenger sale mentality worked a lot better. And so I just kind of dipped into people that I had already worked with, at whether that be at Yelp or at Kapow. And I said, I'm doing this thing. Are you interested at all? Like, I think you would be very good. And particularly at Yelp, half of the job is getting yelled at about your reviews, and then having to shift that into, oh, okay, so you agree it's important. Okay, let's talk about why you agree it's important. And then getting them down the road. And so a lot of kind of resilience is required in that way on every single call. And that, I thought, would translate really well to this particular buyer that we were selling to. Huge difference there was that this was a very end-to-end software. And so it's super different than, ad sales or even, Kapow that I was at prior. It was like a very robust, huge platform with a mobile app and several different versions and different products. And so there was complexity there that I was a little bit worried about. Honestly, I think I got a little bit lucky. I ended up hiring some really great people that I had worked with prior. They did very, very well. Of course, we had some misses, but they were very obvious quickly. And so I also very much, subscribe to the hire slow, fire fast mentality. That's certainly something that happened there. It was, we have a miss, see you later. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a fit. So I think we really benefited from that. Yeah, not that it was easy, but it was very much early stage. I didn't have a huge budget and I had no choice but to do more with less. And so I was like, I'm hiring people I trust and that are doing well. And once, that became repeatable, it was a little bit easier. We didn't get, humongous by any means. But yeah.
Do you ever feel like at an early stage like that, do you ever feel like you weren't winning multiple days in a row? And how did you just stay motivated to keep going?
All the time. Constantly. I very much like a challenge. If you can't, maybe a little bit too much, and I'm very very comfortable with that. I also really believed in the product, and I liked the team and who we were selling to and everything about it. So it was not necessarily demoralizing when we would have, some off days and things like that. That particular company as well had just a longer sales cycle. So it was less day-to-day grind, feeling behind all the time. It was we have a bunch of big deals in the pipeline. When one comes through, we're going to be good. And not that I'm not aware of, we've got to be accountable for a number and I have to make sure that, we're doing everything right. But I think I am very optimistic in that way. And I just kind of always believe it's going to work out. And if it doesn't, we'll figure it out. So I don't know if our team ever really allowed ourselves to kind of get down on it. We did make a lot of changes, I'll say. So, we'd figure out hey, this really isn't working. Or, Mark said this on the phone and that seemed to really resonate. Why is that? Let's go talk to a few clients. Let's see why that resonates so well. Or let's go visit somebody that's here locally. So we did a lot of that and just kind of shifting our mentality or our positioning or, our pricing. We changed all kinds of stuff as we were figuring out kind of what was working and what wasn't. So I think, and testament to the people above me who were allowing that to happen. But I think I would credit not only the success, but also the mentality that we all were able to have to a lot of those things.
Did you have to align with the founders when it came to working with founders? Did you see any issues there, or just your mentality allowed you to be successful? Like, have you ever seen someone, I guess, not align and that's why it didn't work out for them?
I've had some interesting founder situations, like several.
Yeah.
I am very much like an executor
Okay.
and not amazing at like big picture, big, huge, like what seems like a distraction to me, things that founders are very, very good at.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, they think that way. And that's like how they got to this point that they're at when they start hiring people and when they start, trying to scale. And so I think I actually complement that type of personality very well. I think where you're getting at is, does everyone? No. Yeah. It can be really frustrating when it's like, okay, this is a huge distraction. Like, please stop thinking this way. Or if you also have that mentality, then there's no one that's actually like doing the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And especially early stage, it's like doing something is better than doing nothing. Like, we can talk about it all day long, but you got to do something and then go from there. And I feel like I definitely have that mentality. I've mostly hired people with that mentality. And I think to your earlier point, like difference between people who can work at a big company or a small one, like that's something that's really important too, is being able to stay like really focused on getting the job done, even if it's really fun to think about like this crazy startup and like we could be $1 bazillion if we do these 5 crazy ideas. It's like, yeah, but you can't do the 5 crazy ideas if you don't sell anything. So, we gotta work in this area. Yeah, I don't know. Am I answering your question?
Yeah, no, I think for people looking to join, like, I mean, I align with at Abstract, I align really well with Greg. Like, we're different, we're very different in ways, but we're also very similar in ways. And I think when someone's looking to join a startup and make that decision, because it's going to be hard, right? You're going to be working all the time. You're going to be trying to figure out how to make sales, how to make a product. Like, you're always struggling, and there's only a very few wins, especially at an early stage. But if you're not on board with that vision, I think people can have issues right away. And so I think that's important when you're interviewing or looking for companies, is to really make sure you align somewhat with the vision.
I agree with that for sure. I think another probably important part depends on the role. Mm-hmm. So this particular job that we're talking about, I was really tasked with like, hey, can you please come create a sales process and build out the team? Mm-hmm. That's not always what happens at that stage, right? Like, some founders will say, hey, I've got a bunch of this figured out. I'm just going to hire 2 or 3 reps. If you're just a rep that's coming in and you're now reporting directly to a founder, I think that's a very different dynamic. And you're right, is not something I've done really. Versus I came in with, not that I had a ton of experience at that time necessarily, but I came in going like, this is mine. I get to own this and I get to figure out how to make it work. And like, they're giving me the leeway to do that. I don't know if that's typical. I know it's not typical. Yeah. So yeah, I think if you're coming in as like the leader of the sales department, regardless of what that title means, that's a very different dynamic than working like kind of alongside the founder, which is usually, I think, more what happens.
Yeah.
So I could see that being stressful. I do think it's really important to talk about like what that dynamic looks like day to day, what happens, because a lot of founders have a tough time kind of giving the reins over to people to present their product that's, their baby and they know the most about, and like they're probably from that vertical and they have connections and they've got all this stuff that they're involved in. And not that that hasn't happened to me, like it certainly did, but we set really clear boundaries. Like, this is where my job begins and ends, and like, here's when we pull you in. And so I would think if I were, just an AE or even an SDR and I'm going in and I'm going to work directly with the founder, I would want to know what the expectations are in terms of like demoing, or if you have a personal connection, like how do I help out with that? Or is that something that you want to handle? Because those things can be really stressful, especially if you feel like you're doing well and you know what you're doing. And I think some founders, especially like Greg probably doesn't really count because he's sold himself.
Yes.
If they haven't, I think it's tough for really a lot of people, but specifically in this scenario, maybe a founder to remember, oh, like this is how this AE gets paid. Like if I don't want them to feel like I'm just taking this deal from them, which can certainly happen. And I think it's easy to lose sight of those things and not realize what effect you might be having on your team, especially long-term, in terms of trying to like build for long-term success and an actual process that's repeatable, because they get so excited and you can't replicate how excited you are and how knowledgeable you are about your product. It's impossible to actually replicate that. So you have to trust some other people to take pieces of it and iterate that as you go. And I think it's just as important for founders to recognize that. I just know it's harder for them to kind of be on board with that. But I think the stage and the role and like all that stuff matters. But I think those are good conversations, or at least things to consider yourself as you're kind of evaluating different roles.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, you hit a nail on the head. Like that is a great way to explain it. And I hope that everyone can, like, when they're approaching possibly joining a startup, like you got to think about those things and you got to understand the role you're coming in at. And that's just such a great takeaway. I think a lot of people will learn from that. So let's transition a little bit. So I want to talk about now, let's say you are joining a startup, but you're joining as a leadership role, but maybe they already had SDRs, right? They already had a team in place and you're joining as that leader. How, because you've done that, how do you handle that transition? What is it like the first month? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Great question. First, I've at least been fortunate enough to work with either founders or the leaders at that time or the board or whomever it is, to get a lot of like the data ahead of time, like maybe even demos and things like that they were comfortable sharing. So I was able to do a bit of research in the couple scenarios that I've gone in on this now. So I would first like see what assumptions I can find, and then also make like look at the sales plan. And it's like, is this rooted in reality, or did someone, decide that they wanted to be 4X next year? And so they just put a number on this, which happens all the time.
Yep.
So I go through, what are the expectations, figure out like, what's the average deal size? What's the average sales cycle? What kind of team am I going to need to put in place if these people don't work out? Do these people have backgrounds in this? Do they know this vertical really well, or do they know sales really well? Do they happen to be great at both? Like that's, tough to find depending on where you sell. So I would look at those types of things and figure out what we can do to increase the average deal size, shorten the sales cycle. Those are the easiest things without having to know a ton about the product. Like maybe they're discounting a ton. Maybe there's a possibility of just increasing the price, period. Do we really need all the people? Like, are people hitting quota? Does quota make sense? So I would first like try to draw a lot of assumptions just based on just the data that I, hopefully they've got something in place. Sometimes I don't, and you got to just go figure it out. Then, I would want to talk to each team member, listen to them on some calls, like figure out on the ground floor, like what are the blockers for them? Is there this like one thing that everybody could just change and it would be so much easier? Maybe it's something as dumb as like who signs the agreements in Salesforce, like who knows? So those are the things I would look at first before making any kind of certainly decisions, but even assumptions, like trying to validate the things that I thought based on the data. And then really just kind of shadowing. Like for me, I'm a person that I'm not, and we talked about it before the podcast, I'm not incredibly comfortable unless I feel very knowledgeable about something. So I always wanted to learn as much as possible about the industry and the product and like the current sales process before figuring out if I should even change anything. Like, let's say it's working. Great. I'm sure we can iterate upon that and we can make it better. Or is this like a totally broken sales process? Nothing is repeatable and we can't figure out why. Are we positioning our product wrong? Are we, example, one of the companies I've been at, I watched a few demos, I shadowed things, learned a ton about the product, but we were spending, upwards of an hour, hour and a half in the product, and we're really selling a concept. So, one of the first things that I did, and I don't necessarily believe in this, so hopefully no one, gets mad at me. The first thing I did is I was like, we're not going to log into the product. We're just going to sell with a slide deck. Here's our slide deck. You're pitching how this works. If someone needs to see it in the product, then we go there. But this is your discovery. And we found that most of our demos were now under like 20 minutes. and at least we're uncovering the key objection, because this was a rewards platform. And some people just holistically they just don't believe in rewards. Don't believe in the concept, that it's just like, it's a non-starter. Yeah. And so, in the old model, we're getting we're getting over an hour and a half into these demos. And then the real objection comes out because they're just so distracted with this presentation. I'm like, no, we got to get to this immediately. And that's a very high level, like not detailed. Yeah. Because obviously you should be doing better discovery than that. But like, hey, they're really not bought in on this in general. Yeah. They're not seeing the value. And so why are we showing them all these features? So just changing even how we were messaging things. Mm-hmm. Like we were calling it, a marketing automation software. And I'm like, it's not, it's a rewards program. It's got some marketing automation tools, but it's really all to supplement a rewards program. So we just made some quick, small changes like that. And I think that there's probably opportunity to do that at a lot of companies. That's kind of a drastic change. But usually you can find just little things in the sales process that are holding people up. Like maybe you can automate some stuff. Maybe they're not tracking things like loss reason, and it's like, hey, why are we losing deals? And they'll tell you some type of answer. And then you go actually look at all the deals and put in a loss reason. And you're like, actually, that's not what's happening. So I think often in early stage companies, if they don't have somebody who's maybe led it already or doesn't have like a lot of sales experience, there's stuff like that you can usually pick out that will help get some easy wins. And that's important, right? It's just getting a bunch of easy wins. Not only is it going to prove yourself to the team, but obviously to everybody above you too, and just kind of builds momentum from there. So I think it totally depends on, again, the stage and the team makeup. Like another thing, everyone's probably gonna get mad at me, but like, does SDRs even make sense? Like, does that model even make sense? Should the reps be full cycle? I know that's a crazy thing to say nowadays, but there's scenarios where that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. And so those are the types of things that like I would be evaluating, in addition to the obvious, like, is this person even a fit? Should they be in customer success? Should they not be here at all? So those are, and again, I usually make decisions pretty quickly. That's me, but again, I'd rather, fail fast. And I've always felt like the worst case scenario is everybody's gone and it was a really horrible decision. And now I'm still left with me. And I'm pretty confident that like I can get on the phone and sell something if I have to. And I'm also very confident being the only person there that's now going to build a team from scratch. So I might be oddly comfortable in those types of scary scenarios that have allowed me to just kind of like make quick decisions. Like like we keep saying, like fail fast if we're going to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, you have to observe, but you also you have to make those changes quickly. Like you can see all the processes that are happening, just like you said, but then you got to make changes, because if they hired you for a reason. They didn't hire you to maintain. At least I don't think most startups have that budget, right? They hired you to make a difference and to move the needle forward in that role. So you got to be able to do something, and it's not always fun. And I think learning to be, not afraid, like don't worry about the worst case scenario, because if you have confidence in yourself too, that no matter what, you're going to push this through. And I think you're going to get buy-in from the people who are like that as well, right? And you're going to help lead these people forward into whatever is next for them, whether they move up in the company, whether they get a job elsewhere, whether they join an early stage startup, all of the above.
I was going to say too, I'm only speaking from my lens right now. And it's obviously very important to touch on, if you are at a startup and you're on the sales team and someone new comes in and they're going to be leading the team, you are now like the most important person there. They have to learn everything from you. Because like you're saying, like they're probably going to look at data and listen to these demos and like have all these ideas, but there's anyone at least that's going to be smart about it is going to need your opinion. They're going to need your help. They're going to have to lean on you like pretty heavily for quite some time. And so that should be, depending on what your career goals are, that's a huge opportunity. That's hey, like, could I move into management? If I'm a manager, could I move into a director role? Could I oversee different things? Can I have more of a stake in like the process and how we're doing stuff? Could I ask for a raise? Those are all things that, are a huge opportunity typically when somebody new is going to come in. Maybe the budget is, a little bit scary, but, you become a very important part of the puzzle if you're good, if you know what you're doing and you're willing to be coachable and to change, I think is a huge thing. The worst thing you can say is, well, this is how we do it. That's the worst answer, because someone's coming in because they've been tasked with some type of change, whether that change is even just grow the company. Yeah. If it was working perfectly the way that it's going today, they wouldn't have brought somebody else in. So that person is there to try to help grow, minimum. And so if you're thinking, well, the way that we're doing it today is the best way to do it, I'll tell you, you're wrong.
Yeah.
They're going to want your opinion, but if you have ideas, like that's the time to have ideas. If they're saying, why do you do X, Y, Z? Hopefully you have an answer that's remotely thought out. That's not just, that's how we do it in like a combative way. So being willing and open to like changing how things are going and really giving candid opinions. You might get someone that comes in with a bunch of ideas where you're like, I really don't think that's going to work. I think you can certainly voice that, but you better have a why. Mm-hmm. One example is, I went to a company and they didn't have any contracts. They did, but they were all month to month. And in this particular industry and with this product and the churn rate and everything, I'm like, we can't do that anymore. And the whole company, not only the sales team, was like, we'll never be able to sell anything that way. And I was like, okay, well, we'll try it, and we'll see how it works. And they're like, it will never work. We've never done it. I'm like, yeah, but most software companies do, and like they're doing just fine. So let's try it and let's, see how it goes. And I remember the people that were like, yeah, we'll try it. Even if I could tell they disagreed with me, were willing to like, let me prove that they were, I'm sure, hoping that they were right. Newsflash, it went fine. We have contracts now. And that doesn't always happen, right? Like I was totally willing to be wrong. It just, the answer, because we've never had them, like that's not a good answer. Yeah. So I think just that's something important to keep in mind. I think the willingness to change is probably the most important part of working at a startup, like being okay with changing stuff. And even if it's majorly disruptive, I think asking why and always explaining why is super important in really any scenario and anything. So the more people understand, the more on board they're likely to be. That's, I guess, just something I always try to employ, regardless of, company stage or what my role is, at whatever company it is.
Yeah, you made two really good points there. The first one, as a leader, if you are joining and you're going to have a team immediately, like just because something's always been done one way, or just because the industry does it one way, doesn't mean something else might not work, right? You never know if it hasn't been tried at that company, and that you can't be afraid to try that. And then the second point you made is like a leadership perspective was, it's okay if you're wrong. You just have to admit that you're wrong and then have the next idea of why you're doing this and what's happening. Like you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to go bad. They're going to also go great. But if you can't admit when you're wrong, you're going to have a hard time getting that team on board with you as well.
For sure. A million percent.
Yeah. Let's kind of transition a little bit to like the overarching, like maybe misconceptions that happen at startups, or if someone's never been, like, what was that first impression when you joined, and maybe was there anything that you thought would be true that wasn't?
I feel like I might not be a great example because we didn't have like shows that featured startups and stuff like that yet. And I was such an early stage that like we didn't have, kegs in the office, and like that was not our situation. Frankly, I feel like when I was at Yelp, they still considered themselves a startup, even though they were definitely not by any stretch of the imagination. But they had all that stuff, like all the snacks in the office, and like, they didn't pay us very much, and that was supposed to be like happy hours, and like that was the cool like selling point. I don't feel like I had expectations of that, maybe ever, but I've hired a lot of people that did, or I've interviewed a bunch of people that, those things are really important to them because they've, watched Silicon Valley or some show, whatever. Show I haven't seen that I'm quoting.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like it's getting way more challenging now. Like the hiring environment now, especially with the remote situation, shifted from like, are there free happy hours? Do you get, baseball tickets to a suite every now and then? Do you, have a keg in the office and a bunch of free snacks and all that stuff? Like people cared about that a ton. Now so many people are remote that I think the new question is like, can I work remote? So I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel like my first real exposure to a startup was exactly what like the non-glamorous part is, which is like, we're basically in a warehouse. I've got like one computer and one monitor screen that is super cheap. And, we're there to kind of grind it out. And so to your earlier point, like you got to believe in the vision and the product and enjoy the people around you was kind of the thing that was important to me. But I never went in with like this crazy idea that like, I'm going to work at this company with this founder. We're going to be a zillion person company worth, $20 billion. I never went in with that mentality. I always went in with like, how can we just be like a little bit better and then just continue to get a little bit better? In fact, when even the founders or new CEOs or whatever would talk about like the crazy numbers they think that we're going to be able to do, I would say I'm pessimistic, but it was like, I don't know if that's really,
Yeah,
that would take a while. So I don't know. I've never had that like crazy like startup. I don't know. Like,
that's not a bad thing though. I think that's like a different perspective because there's so much out there now, and everybody just wants that get rich mentality. But honestly, like what I found is most people aren't willing to do the work that it takes to get to that point, or they can't comprehend the work that it takes. So I think almost having that mentality of like, well, I'm just going to grow a little bit. I'm just going to get this far, and going step by step is not a bad take at all, because I think it allows you to be successful.
I think you just hit a very important thing I can't believe I haven't brought up yet, which is that's one of the massive changes from a big company to not even necessarily a startup, but like a smaller company is, I think regardless of role, even if you're, a VP of something at a small company, that means you also do the work. You don't have a full team of people that goes out and executes and does all these things. Like you want something done, there's no one to do it. Maybe there's some people to help you, but you have to be willing to do it, especially at like sub 30 people. Yeah. There's not a legal team. Like you're already, and so there's that type of stuff that I think at any level is important to call out. Like if you're used to, oh, I just send that over to the blah, blah, blah team, like pretend that team isn't there because they're probably not there. And that can be a huge adjustment, I think, for a lot of people. And I've certainly worked with a lot where I have no doubt they would be amazing at the right size company with the right role. But at, a company with 40 people and you don't want to actually execute, or like you don't have the skills and you haven't done it in however long, like it just doesn't make sense. It's just not a good fit. And like, you're not happy there. We're not happy there. Work gets dumped on the other people that will actually do it. And then everybody's unhappy. So I think that's something really important to consider when you're looking at, a company and, different roles. And then another thing people might get mad at you about, but, a lot of people, a lot of the startup world is like, oh, join. And, you get all the, pizza parties and all that junk that I've talked about, but you also get equity. Okay. I don't think a lot of companies do a great job explaining like how stock options actually work. And if you're early enough stage, like what your options actually mean. Like, let's say we get those are things that you can certainly ask, by the way. And there's a bunch of resources online, and, there's a lot of ways that you can kind of educate yourself on these things, but that is something I don't think I understood for quite some time. And it frankly is very confusing depending on the type of company and the structure and all that stuff. But it's easy to look on the surface. It's like, oh, I have equity. Amazing. Yeah. That means if we sell for, $1 billion tomorrow, that I'm overnight a millionaire. And it could be, but it's very unlikely that's how it works. It's more likely your options are worth nothing. So I think I get why companies offer that. I do think obviously it should be a huge incentive. That's why, making sure that you like the people and the vision and you feel comfortable with like the growth strategy is important. And that's maybe less really small company because that equity probably does really mean something. But I'm thinking of like once you get 100 people or so, maybe even like 50, depending on how many rounds they've done and stuff like that, like it's possible it will mean nothing.
Mm-hmm. Well, and understanding it too, like doing that research beforehand, because everybody's different in how they structure it, and you don't want to go in thinking you have this when like it's not written that way. And there's some companies that are like, I'm very grateful with Greg. He's very transparent about stuff, and he helps explain it when I want to learn. He's like all about it. Where there's some companies that aren't, and it's just that's all about the fit that you got to find too.
Yeah, I think people are afraid to ask, or they all feel like they should know. And so just so I'm, thinking it out loud, most people don't know. Most people have no idea how it works. And it's perfectly fine to ask those types of things. If you have somebody that you're interviewing with that should know that answer and is not willing to share it with you, I would personally, I would not consider that as an option for my career. No one should be uncomfortable with that, because they either think you're not going to like the answer, which is not a great foot to start off on, or they don't know the answer, which might be concerning. So, if they're not willing to get that for you and explain it to you at minimum, that to me would be a red flag. Just considering like what I've been through in my experience with that type of thing. But yeah, I think it's a perfectly fine thing to bring up and ask about, and not feel embarrassed if you don't know, because people don't.
Yeah, agreed. I think that's a great point. So as we wrap things up, I have a couple more questions, and it's more of just like your journey. You've been through a few companies. You've been through, very early stage pre-revenue to, managing multiple teams. Like, everything that you've done so far, has it been worth it? And would you do it again?
Sorry if you heard my phone ring.
Oh, it's okay.
Would I do it again? 100%. Like, I've learned so much and been through so many very odd scenarios in the last even just like 10 years. I have no idea where I'd be today if I hadn't been through all that kind of weirdness. But yeah, I guess I just like learning new stuff. I like changing how we're doing things. I like trying to figure out like a new process and how to work better cross-functionally. And like those types of things are really, really important at a startup, and are really important, frankly, I think at any stage. The more that you understand, the better, informed decisions that you can make. Or really, even if you're just in sales, the better informed you are when you're talking to a prospect. If you know the onboarding process better, you're more educated, you're more confident, you're going to talk about that a bit better. If you also know what the onboarding process is like and why clients churn, you can identify that early. You can probably objection handle a little bit earlier, and understand that everything is cyclical, and you're going to sign this deal, and if you do it right and you didn't set improper expectations, they're going to be the best client ever, and that's your new referral. So I think, I've just had to learn a lot of crazy stuff in the last several years that has, I think, super paid off and put me in a unique position where I feel like I can do a lot of things. I would say I'm not like a master at necessarily anything. And I'm just super nosy and interested in everything all the time. So it's kind of worked out well. But I also, for sure, just insert myself and stuff. Like, I'll just go learn about it and then be like, what if we did this? Like, I'm the nut job that just won't stop asking questions and giving my opinion all the time. So
if that's you, it's okay, because look how successful you've been. Like, I think there's many people like that.
I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. This has been great. There's been so much, I think, just like personally, as well as hopefully everyone that's listened and stayed through this. There's so many nuggets and little things that, whether it's a bigger startup, a smaller startup, whether you get along with the founders, where maybe you have a leader coming in and you don't know how that's going to work. Like, there's so much advice you've given that I really like. I'm grateful, and I know everyone listening is grateful for that. But if someone wanted to maybe learn more or pick your brain, like, where can they follow you or, get in touch with you?
I guess LinkedIn. Yeah, LinkedIn works. That would be fine. I'd certainly be willing to exchange ideas and talk about my crazy experiences. But Sure. I guess LinkedIn, I guess I have Twitter, but I don't really use it. So
yeah, same.
There.
Same. LinkedIn is, and I mean, is there anything else that you want to tell everybody before we wrap this up?
No, not promoting anything crazy.
Okay. Well, perfect. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I know I'm excited to listen to this again. There's a lot of nuggets in here.
I'm scared. I didn't cuss too much though, or maybe at all. So
no, you did great.
I didn't start with that like things you don't know about me, but I told you yesterday I cuss way too much. So I've been making a real effort. Like I have a sticky note over here that's like, stop.
I love it. That's awesome. Well,
right.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Make sure to follow us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or visit abstract.ai, abstrakt.ai to learn more. Keep kicking ass. Peace out.